It was a day like any other. My cousins and I decided to go to a Western-themed amusement park near Anaheim, California, to spend some time together as we were all on the cusp of adulthood and haven't been to an amusement park together since we were kids. All was going well. It was hot, the lines were long, and after riding rides all day, our feet were killing us. We planned to stay until the park closed, so we were waiting at a roller coaster that faced towards the children's section of the park while also planning where we would go next. During our planning and waiting in the long line, we heard 3 distinct pops. We assumed that they were fireworks or general theme park noises, so my cousin's boyfriend made a little bit of a joke that someone just got popped. We thought nothing of it and continued to wait. All of a sudden, a large wave of people came running through the children's section of the park. I figured a ride that had been closed opened up and people were flocking to be first in line, but then an even larger wave of people came after. I saw parents hiding their kids in the bushes where the rides were, ride operators rushing people off of the rides they were on, and everyone around me asking what the F is going on. That's when the most chilling words I've ever heard in my life came over the ride speakers. Get down. Active shooter. We ducked down and were absolutely terrified. My oldest cousin's boyfriend was crouching down saying that we needed to get the F out of there, but considering the line we were in was elevated and faced directly where everyone was running from, we knew we couldn't stay there. After a minute of sitting there, a girl from above us told us we need to get out of the line and leave. So we ran down the ramps of the line, passing by a crying lady holding her 2 crying kids who looked me in the eyes and said through tears, "This is not a drill." That's when I knew I had to be serious. We ran to a wall and waited there while crouching. I was praying that me and my family could get out of there alive. My oldest cousin was calling her parents, and there were children around us who were just crying. We had to keep moving, so we got up and ran towards the back of the park to find the emergency exits. My cousin's boyfriend asked an employee where we could find one, but they didn't respond. They just stared at him blankly. We decided to follow a mob to the horse trails where the stagecoach goes around. We ran up a large ramp on the trail so we could get to the front of the park. Suddenly, we were told to go back and get down. People were running back and we all thrashed around until we were all sat down on the floor. I saw the police outside the park, and lights of the park were turned off other than the decorative lighting. We were sitting ducks. If a shooter was in the park, we were out in a high, open, visible area. I called my mom and explained the situation, but all she could do was tell me to leave where I was, but she didn't understand that if I ran back or forward, I'd be right in the path of the shooter. I looked around to see hysterical people. A father was having a breakdown because his daughter wasn't with him. A girl was crying because she was alone with her little brother. And the one that got me the worst was a little boy who came to the park to celebrate his birthday, sobbing and telling me that he just wanted to see his daddy again. I tried to reassure him that he'd be all right and that he'll see his father again, but that he has to stay quiet and behind us. Earlier, my one cousin let her little sister wander off with her 2 friends while we went to ride the roller coaster, and we had no idea where she was. So they ran off by themselves to go and look for her. We were stuck up there for 10 or 20 minutes. My youngest cousin was crying and her sister was going to start crying after seeing her. It was just chaos. But eventually a group of people came from behind us to cross the bridge. We followed them to the bottom of the ramp, to which we were met by an employee who informed us the shooting was a drive-by and that we were safe to leave the park. We walked out, all shaken up, and my mom told me that we should still be careful as they could come back. Once we got to our car, we made sure our one cousin was all right. They found their sister and her friends in a candy shop, hidden with a ton of kids crying. Once we got on the freeway, we were home free and could finally breathe. The whole experience was traumatic, to say the least. While we may not have been in too much danger looking back, not knowing where the shooter was and the panic of all the people in the park combined left all of us hesitant to go back to an amusement park for a long, long while. The year was 2001. I was a very naive 18-year-old female at the time who had grown up in a tiny community in deep South Mississippi. Population at the time was around 411. It was one of those places where everyone went to school K through 8 in their respective community throughout the county. Then once high school came, everyone from the entire county either went to the public high school or the small private school in the city within the county. Of course, by this time in my life, I was out of school and working at one of the convenience stores on the outskirts of this little country town. But as small town USA goes, if you stay in that town, you will always see people you went to school with on a regular basis, whether it's in passing or hanging out with your friends. But anyway, I would work 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. a couple of nights a week and weekends from open to close. I was never left at the store alone. Due to some robberies in the past, my boss, Lee, was always there in the office monitoring the CCTV just in case. Every afternoon around 4, this guy, Chris, that I had grown up riding the bus with, would come in and buy a Black and Mild and a couple 40s. I never knew him personally. He had a sister and they were both very shy and quiet throughout our school years. Well, I'd be nice and speak to him each day. And each day, like clockwork, Lee would come out of the office after Chris left and say, "Something's wrong with that boy." I'd always reply to Lee and say, "Be nice, he's just shy." He would respond, "I'm telling you, something's just not right with him." Well, as months went on, Chris and I would talk a little more until one evening he'd ask me if I wanted to go ride and smoke with him after work. I said, "Sure, I'll be done at 10. I mean, it's not like there was a lot more to do back then, so why not? I generally got a ride from my sister after work. She worked just across town and our schedules were similar, so this night in particular my sister shows up and as I'm about to tell her to go ahead, I got this sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach. Something was telling me to get in with my sister and go home. So, that's what I did. She asked me to drive, so I hopped in, and as we were leaving the parking lot, Chris was pulling into the parking lot to pick me up. I got out of there before he noticed it was me in that car. It was really strange. I'd never had that feeling before, but I just knew that I couldn't get in that car with him. The next morning, as some kids were coming into school at that small private school I'd mentioned earlier, they saw something strange at one of the gates. Well, curiosity got the best of them, so they went over to check it out. And that's where they saw her. A half-nude lady who had been mutilated in some very disturbing ways, just tossed out like trash. Of course, news spread like wildfire in a small town, and by noon that day, everyone had heard about this poor lady and how she had been dumped like trash for these poor kids to find. I went into work that day as usual, and my boss comes in a little later. He put his stuff down in the office and says to me, "I told you there was something wrong with that boy. It was him." Apparently after I left the store, that night he picked up a lady who was having car trouble, and he did those horrific things to her. He was picked up by police that morning after a local ER doctor called them to report a suspicious incident that happened between he and Chris in the wee mornings of the hour. Chris had come into the ER with a large wound in his hand from a knife. His demeanor was strange, and he had actually threatened the doctor. He told him if he hurt him while stitching his wound, he would kill him. So it didn't take the police long to put 2 and 2 together. At that moment, I knew that little voice in my head had saved me from a night of terror and apparent death. Over the years, I've thought back to that night and felt guilt because it was supposed to be me in that car. It still makes me tear up as I write this. I can only imagine what those last few hours were like for her on this earth. My advice to any young lady or gents: if your gut tells you don't go, then don't go. Be safe out there. You never know what someone is capable of. This story happened 15 years ago, but the details of the event have never faded from my mind. I was 13 at the time, and I remember it being a hot summer day. Sunday, 12:15. I had just dropped my friend off at the edge of my small village in the Netherlands after a morning of sports, because she felt uncertain of the way home. I was cycling back to my dad's place, going through the little shortcuts only a local would truly know. Eventually I entered a familiar street, just off the single main road in the village, a street my mother and I lived on. There was a silver sedan parked on the side of the road, and I was approaching it from the back. When I made the cycle past it, a male voice suddenly called out from the open driver's side window. "Excuse me, may I ask you something?" I stopped and got off my bicycle, noting a bald Middle Eastern man in his 30s looking at me expectantly. He seemed clean-shaven and very friendly looking. He was wearing a white polo shirt, from what I recall. I just felt that he was very approachable. And naive I was. I approached his car window and asked what I could do for him. Now, in my country, it is polite to look someone in the eye when speaking to them, and being a polite kid, I never diverted my gaze from his eyes. "Can you tell me the way to the nearest gas station?" As I'm typing this, I realize this is a bit of a strange question to ask. Parked in a quiet side alley in a tiny town with a single main road, but at the time I saw nothing wrong with it. I explained the route to the town's gas pump, just a right and follow the road for a minute. He made me repeat it. When finally, after the third time, he grasped my simple instructions. He shook his head and told me he didn't want to go to that specific station, but wanted directions to another. Wasn't there another station nearby, he asked me. It was an odd request, but perhaps he didn't agree with the station's gas prices or something. It was a small town pump, after all, owned by a local family, so I gave him directions to the other one, which was literally take a left onto the main road and drive for about 10 minutes. The gas pump will be on your right-hand side. The man smiled at me, and I hesitantly smiled back, wondering if he got the instructions. He had these very distinct, large black eyes, and they roved over me, from the top of my head to my sports shoes. "You're a very pretty girl," he said, making me shift uncomfortably. "Could you explain it to me again? I didn't quite catch that." I mumbled a thank you and grateful that I had kept my bicycle in between this man and me, suddenly feeling very exposed with this strange man. There was no one else around, yet my shy nature and need to be nice made that I didn't dare leave without a cue from this man. Stupid, I know, but that was 13-year-old me. I repeated my instructions again and again, thoroughly and uncomfortably, but this man then said he actually did want to go to the local station. And for the umpteenth time, I gave this man directions. I started pointing and gesturing, and just finding this all very strange. I even started to wonder if maybe he was just mentally slow. I thought about leaving, but I also thought and wondered, would he chase me with his car? Would he try to hit me? I didn't like his eyes anymore. And then, out of nowhere, as I stood bent over my bicycle, straining to hear his soft-spoken and gentle voice, he asked me, "Would you like to see me climax?" I still remember the feeling of icy panic that exploded in my chest, that breathtaking pressure that froze on my limbs. I stared at him, wide-eyed and numb with shock, before finally my eyes slid off his face and down to his lap. Sure enough, the man had his pants opened, his member blatantly on display and being harshly pumped by his right hand. I had never even seen a man's member before at that point. I just remember feeling ashamed, thinking that this was my fault. I thought to myself that he must have thought that I had seen him during our talk or had been encouraging him. I had been so close to him after all, but I hadn't even noticed his arm moving, him doing what he was doing. Not noticed as he stared at me intently throughout my silly charades, even though I was but a step away from him, and never even looked through the interior of his car. The only thing I had been focused on was the man's face, his own gaze firmly directed on me, on my body, on display in my summer sport outfit, and I felt disgusting. Heart hammering in my chest, I stumbled back and stammered, sorry, I'm so sorry." I don't even know why I was apologizing. Thoroughly disquieted, I fled the street I lived on with my mother and raced over to my father's house, where I was staying that weekend. At the end of the street, I looked back and saw that he hadn't moved. His car was still turned off. I realized now that he had been finishing his business. Back home, I called my friend, upset and needing to talk about it as she was still cycling home. I whispered the words that he had said to me. She comforted me, and then sat on the couch and merely stared ahead, going over how stupid I had been over that close call. The image of the man burned into my brain, and I just felt so utterly disgusting and disgusted. And eventually, my father came home and I told him about the incident. Not the words, I really couldn't repeat those to him, but about what the man was doing. He laughed it off, believing me, but not taking my shock all that seriously. I'd get over it or something. But now in my late 20s, I realized I should have called the cops despite my dad saying that wasn't necessary. This man was parked in a residential neighborhood. I knew children that lived on that street. Who knew how many others he had tricked into being the unwitting victims of his sick and depraved fantasies? And I wish the story ended there. A couple of weeks went by and rumors went around the teens in my town. The girls that had to cycle to school, to the next town over, told me about a man some girls had encountered, parked by the side of the woods in a silver car asking for directions. They told me to avoid this man as he was creepy, but nothing major was described to me. I guessed it must have been the same man I had encountered on that particular Sunday afternoon. He must prey on cycling school kids during the workdays. Sundays, he haunted those neighborhoods. Stupidly, I still told no one, and despite all the kids knowing about the man parked in the woods, I suppose no one actually called the cops or told their parents, and life went on. Now, the cycling lane the man had parked alongside, the one we had to cycle, took about 20 to 30 minutes. At times, it cut through a part of the woods separated from the main road, away from all peering eyes. When it was dark out during autumn or winter, all of us knew that no one was to cycle to and from school alone there. No matter how popular you were, you made sure to cycle alongside others, even if you just followed them from a distance, just to be safe. Now, this was early summer coming up. It didn't get dark until around 9 or 10. Eventually, the worst happened. The man no longer was content to talk to young girls. He decided to take one. Now, I haven't heard this story personally from the girl, but from a friend who knew the girl it happened to. One of the girls in my village, Chloe, had fallen for the same trap that I had, only this time in a part of the woods. The man had ripped the 12-year-old girl from her bicycle and thrown her into the back of his trunk. He had then torn off into a sandy road into the forest. I can only imagine his motivations, but he had made one mistake. He had left Chloe with her cell phone. Chloe immediately called her mother hysterically about being locked in the back of a trunk, being thrown and slammed about as this man floored it. The car bounced like crazy, and she concussed herself badly when he hit a particularly rough pothole. Her mother, keeping her hysterical and terrified daughter on the phone, phoned the police. And the only thing the cops knew was that they were looking for a silver car somewhere in those woods, one where 12-year-old Chloe was locked in this trunk, and that if they didn't find her, who knew what this man was going to do? I was told that she had screamed so loudly, so loud in fact that she must have spooked the man, or maybe he realized she had a phone, or he found a sliver of his conscience. Whatever his reasons, this man hit the brakes, went to his trunk, and threw her out of his car. He then sped off, leaving the concussed and crying Chloe there on that sandy path. I don't know if the cops found her or if she stumbled back herself, but the man was caught. He had been released from a mental hospital apparently only a few months earlier, but I have no idea for what reason. I can't imagine the utter terror that girl must have felt. Cannot begin to tell you the guilt I felt for not just reporting what had happened to me. Would they have arrested him that day? Or would he have just driven off after doing what he did to himself while looking at me? What that mother must have felt, receiving that call from her child, believing it to be the last moments of her 12-year-old daughter's life. It is terrifying to think what could have happened that day I encountered the same man. Had I not backed away when I did, had I not kept my bicycle between us, I didn't have my cell phone with me. The only thing I know is that this man went back to that mental hospital. I don't know if he is still there. The only thing I do know is that even 15 years later, I would recognize this man on sight. And I learned my lesson, to always be on my guard whenever a stranger asks for directions. So I was going with my parents to a concert. My stepdad is really tall and quite bulky, so he's pretty intimidating, and in this situation I was very thankful for that. I was down in the crowd by the stage watching the show when this guy strikes up a conversation with me. He looks about mid-30s and isn't particularly good looking, but not bad looking either. Just neutral, I suppose. But I immediately get a super weird feeling about him. I had been talking to excited concert goers all night, so I wasn't too put off by him talking to me. We keep talking about this and that when, like out of the blue, he asked my age and who I'm there with. I lied and told him that I was 16, even though I was 15 at the time. I also told him I was there with my parents. He then asked me if I, a supposed 16-year-old, wanted to go to the 21 and over part of the venue and go get a drink with him. I obviously said no and that I'm okay, but thanks for asking. I forgot to mention that the whole time we were talking, he was excitedly looking at my chest then back up at my eyes. After I said no to his offer, we kept talking for a minute and he just kept talking about his car or going to the bar or leaving with him, and I just got so creeped out that I said that I had to go back to my seat. As I was walking back to my seat, this dude follows me down the aisle. I only noticed when I see him speed walking by me then down the aisle. I looked over to see my parents using nuclear warfare with their eyes at this dude. I talked to my parents at my seat, and that's when they say that they had been watching our whole interaction. They said that they could feel my uncomfortable vibe there, and they could read all over my face that this dude was an absolute weirdo. My mom almost stepped in to get the creep to leave me alone, but my stepdad told her that I could handle this and to let me try to figure it out. And to be honest, I appreciated that. It gave me a chance to learn how to handle pieces of child harassing nonsense garbage like this guy. It was around this time last year, the prime time of the pandemic. I didn't want to do schoolwork, so I went with my mom to go grocery shopping. But of course, like almost every teenager, I went into one store and got bored. So not wanting to go shopping anymore, I just told my mom that I wanted to stay in the car and that I could watch my sister. Although my mom said yes, my sister didn't want to stay in the car with me and started to throw a fit. Not wanting to have to listen to my sister complaining on the ride home, my mom just said whatever and took her in the store. After about 30 minutes in the car, my mom finally comes out of the store. I was about to say, geez, took long enough as a joke, but I was cut off by my mom saying, you should have come in. Thinking something funny happened, I asked her why. And what she said next froze me to the core and sent a chill down my spine. I think human traffickers are trying to steal Mary. I asked what happened, my eyes wide and looking at my sister, oblivious to this fact. And following is what my mom said happened. They were strolling down the part of Walmart where sports balls and stuff were. There wasn't anyone other than them in the aisles, or so my mom thought. My mom got the feeling as if she was being watched, so my mom, being smart, not to alert her watcher, she stops the cart, pretending to look at the things on the shelf. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw two men that were around 5'10" with hoodies and baseball caps on. She thought it was creepy and started to walk away. That's when she noticed one of the men was really close to Mary and the other less than 2 inches behind her. My sister was just 6, so my mom thought that they were being creepy towards her. My mom was about to spin around to slap the dude behind her, but just before she does, she thinks to herself not to let Mary out of her sight. Mom picks up the pace and gets to a part of the store where a few more people are. She turns and noticed that they both stopped and were walking away, but they weren't purchasing anything and were just leaving the store empty-handed. My mom sighed in relief and checked out. I asked her where she got the idea that there was going to be some type of human trafficking, but apparently there had been a slew of kidnappings occurring in that specific area and potentially even at that Walmart. We do live right on the border. I've thought to myself if I had gone in there with my mom and sister that they would have been more safe, and I really wish I had gone. But because of my selfishness, I could have been the reason my sister wouldn't be here now. My mom, after that day, also changed in some way because she actually bought a gun to protect her and us. As I said, this might not be as scary as other ones, but it's just more the connotation of what could have happened. But nonetheless, it's kept me away from Wally World, especially in that area, for quite some time. I was about 14 years old when this happened to me. I've never had many of these kinds of situations happen to me in my life. I've been fortunate enough to swerve clear of any insane or creepy people. I used to be a swimmer and trained at my local indoor swimming center. Next to the long-length swimming pool where people trained or did their own personal exercise was a waist-length kid pool. I was seated on a bench in front of the long-length pool, waiting for my swim coach to finish training the younger kids. I was early, as usual, and my other friends who trained with me hadn't arrived yet. I can't remember what I was doing. Either I was on my phone or I was simply watching the younger kids swim, but suddenly this tall, 30-year-old something man approached me. As a 14-year-old girl, you'd think I'd know what to do or have been warned by parents on how to react in this situation, but I was shy and too friendly for my own good. So when he introduced himself and held out his hand so that I could shake it, I introduced myself and took his hand and shook it with a nervous and confused smile. He sat down beside me, and two things I distinctly remember from this man is that his attitude and the way he acted was very similar to a shy young teenage boy, plus the fact that his scent smelt like vinegar and chlorine pool water mixed together. He pressed his knees together and placed his hands on his lap as he straightened his back. He would glance over at me just to quickly look away like some shy high school girl. Being young and attending a Catholic high school with a large number of special needs children, I simply assumed that he was exactly like those kids, maybe. The way he spoke, sat, his facial expressions, and how he was acting reminded me of this girl with special needs in my school where I would sit in the library and read the newspaper with her while I waited for my mom to pick me up. So I decided to be nice and hear him out, thinking maybe he was here with a family member and that they would come over to retrieve him soon. I can't exactly remember the whole conversation or how long we talked. I just remember being nervous the whole time. Then, at one point in our conversation, he mentioned he had a friend who wanted to meet me too, then pointed over to the kid pool not too far away from us. If I wasn't already anxious enough, seeing this guy peek over the edge of the pool definitely made my heart drop. I don't even understand how he was peeking over the edge since he was on the pool steps, so his body must have been lying flat over the steps for his head to be so low. He then gets up and steps out of the water. This guy is bigger and shorter. I can't remember what his face looks like, nor do I want to, but I remember he was even creepier than the man next to me. Although I don't remember what his face looks like, I just remember the feeling he gave me when I reached out to shake his hand. I could feel his eyes staring down at me, and it wasn't the same as how the man next to me would stare at me. At that moment, I think I felt comfortable with the weird guy next to me than with this creepy guy in front of me. Unlike the other guy, this dude seemed normal and like a typical creepy older guy peering down at a 14-year-old girl. Now, I don't even know if perving on a 14-year-old girl who was sitting alone was ever their intention in the first place, but it really did feel like it. I can't exactly remember if I had a conversation with him or not. All I remember happening next was my swim coach calling me over saying that I should start getting ready and change into my swimsuit. I obviously took this chance, still being friendly, and told the two men that I had to go. I can't remember if they said anything or not, but I grabbed my bag and walked over to my swim coach. I knew he only said that to give me an opening to escape those two men because there was still a lot of time before I needed to get into the pool. My coach asked me if I knew those two men, and I told him no. He pointed out that he noticed how nervous I was and even pointed at a lady I hadn't even noticed sitting on the other end of the bench I was sitting on and mentioned that she was listening to my conversation and keeping a close eye on me. During that whole situation, I don't think I even tried to look over to my coach for help. Even to this day, I think it's because I was scared that if I were to constantly look around at people instead of keeping eye contact, that it would have made it obvious to the person that I'm uncomfortable or scared. Like I've said, I have never before or since then experienced anything so scary and creepy with another person. I did see those two men once more after that. I think it was a few days or few weeks after my first encounter with them, but I saw them in the kid pool once again, just floating around. I no longer sat on those benches anymore. Instead, I sat on these sitting steps right next to the long length of pool, so people who are only using that pool usually sit there. This is nothing compared to the other stories I've heard on here, but to me, it was the creepiest encounter I've had so far. Now that I'm an 18-year-old girl living in a city who works mostly night shifts, I'm sure I'll experience more similar situations and just hope I'll be smart enough to react in a better way. This happened to me in 2014, on my way to my great-grandparents' house in Goose Creek, South Carolina. We had left in the late morning at around 11 a.m. to try and get there before dinner. Our whole reason behind going was for a cruise vacation my great-grandmother had paid for. It was going to be me, my mother, my father, my aunt, my other aunt, my great-grandfather, and my great-grandmother, along with a few other friends of my great-grandmother's. In the car was my mother and I, along with most of our luggage. My father was coming a few days later due to work stuff, so we decided to drive out that day to get there early and catch up on family drama and the usual. My mother had just finished packing the car, and she called me down the stairs to get in the car with a bag of entertainment things. I came rushing down, excited to go on a road trip and to see my family, since at that time they hadn't caused many of the problems that pushed us apart today. We started our drive on some scenic back roads before getting towards the inner city and hopping onto the highway. In this story, I was only 7, so I'm still blissfully naive and unaware of many things in the world. I'm also fuzzy on the details of the persons involved, so the descriptions of the clothing and whatnot may be a bit skewed. I was mainly focused on Minecraft and collecting Beanie Boos at the time, rather than the dangers of reality and strange people. After about 2 hours of us being on the road, I told my mom I needed the bathroom. I had drank about 2 water bottles and my bladder was complaining, and since we were still near the busy city area, there were plenty of gas station corner stores that we could stop at. My mom asked if I was hungry as well, to which I excitedly said yes, since this meant I got junk food, which I didn't get often. So, we pull off at an exit and come across a QT gas station not long after. I'm bouncing out of my seat with excitement, ready to grab my favorite chips and candy and a sugary drink, which I know my mom will later regret letting me have. We get out of the car. My mom grabs her purse and we head inside to the bathrooms. My mom waited outside patiently for me to use the restroom, and after a few minutes I came out and we walked around grabbing snacks and drinks. I grabbed dill pickles, Lay's, Rolo candies, Cheetos, some sausage sticks, beef jerky, and a Sprite and water from the cooler sections. My mom had a handful of things as well and went up to the counter and stood in line. While waiting to check out, I counted the cars in the parking lots and how many of each brand there were, since I was super obsessed with cars back then. My mom tugged my arm a bit as the line moved up, so I followed her like the clingy 7-year-old that I was. We get up to the counter, greet the cashier, pay for our things, and leave with 2 bags of snacks and drinks. I was giddy with a big grin on my face the whole time, knowing that I would be set for the rest of the trip with these very rare treats. As we finish up at the counter, a man in a red Nike hoodie, black sweats, black shoes, and sunglasses comes into the station. I took particular notice of him because of the fact that he was wearing sunglasses indoors. He walks casually up to the counter with a warm smile on his face and rests his arms on the counter. My mom notices him as well and gives him the short "hey" smile that you give strangers when you don't want to start conversation. He doesn't notice and looks over at the cashier. And this is when things go south, real quick. The man playfully smacks the counter and says in a friendly tone, "Give me all your money." The cashier looks at him confused, since the man acted like he knew the cashier. The guy gives the cashier a few seconds before becoming serious, slamming his hands on the counter, pulling out a gun, and demanding money again. This time he's very serious, and he demands in no longer a joking tone. My mom begins to drag me out of the store while I stare in confusion and almost awe at what's happening before me. She throws me into the car, not literally, but you know what I'm getting at, and quickly speeds out of the parking lot. The last thing I saw of the gas station was the man putting his gun to the back of the cashier's head and yelling something inaudible to him. It's been 7 years since that incident, and we did call the cops that day, but never really ever got to see closure. All I know is that gas stations still make me nervous and give me an angsty vibe. The last I saw and heard is that QT had been torn down and a new building erected in its place. I know, not the dramatic, chaotic ending some of you might have hoped for, but this is still a scary, traumatic experience for me, and I often am left wondering, whatever happened to that poor gas station clerk? This happened around the year 2000. About a year after this took place, I started dating one of these friends, and that's when I first heard about this dog wolf story. I have since asked each friend over the years and miles apart, and they all remember the same exact encounter. Before my ex was even my boyfriend, let's call him Jay, he and our other friends were about 17 to 18 years old. At that age, I remember it being an adventure to find a place to smoke. Let's hike to blank and go puff. The good old days, when we got away from parents and planned a day around smoking. It was Jay and his best friend B and their girlfriends S and M. The four of them decided to drive to Mount Pisgah, a beautiful wooded area outside of Eugene, Oregon. It's more of a hill, but it's nature in its prime for sure. I've been out there many times growing up, and I know exactly what trail they were on, the main one that connects the parking lot to the river. They had driven in B's little white sedan, parked in the parking lot, and then walked to the river. On the way to the river from the lot, there is a very small bridge that crosses a small creek. The group spent the day out there, swimming and puffing, puffing and swimming, just being typical Oregonian teens. I can imagine the hunger is what drove them to go home after a few hours as the sun began to set. Either activity alone is bound to get someone hungry, let alone both. So, they walked along the well-worn main dirt path to the parking lot. This path has since been paved according to Google Maps. It doesn't take them but 20 minutes or so for them to get back to the little footbridge by the parking lot that they had crossed when they hiked in. When they reached the small footbridge near the parking lot, B looked out into the vast field between them and the wooded mountain and noticed a huge dog near the tree line, about 100 yards away. They all later described it as the biggest dog they had ever seen. The dog was just sitting there, not looking scary, just looking like a humongous friendly dog. It was starting to get dark, and from M's and J's descriptions and the drawing she did for me later in 2005, it was very shaggy and furry. I may even still have that notebook where she drew the dog thing. If I ever find it, I'll post it. My friends continued to walk across the small wooden bridge, and one of the girls screamed. The big dog was now on its hind legs, standing much closer than when they had seen it just a couple of seconds earlier. It had traversed most of the large field in the seconds it took to get across this 10-foot-long bridge. Whatever this thing was, it was fast, quiet, and stealthy. My four friends ran to the car, and they had the classic cliche, "I can't get the keys in," because B was fumbling madly for the keys. At this point, the dog was standing on its legs at the very edge of the parking lot, looking at them. Still had the dog face, still had the dog body, it just was standing up. They never saw it walking, on all four or just two. It was like every time they looked up, it was just standing there closer. As Jay had said, every time they looked up, he was just closer, but never completely moving. All of them recounted how surreal it was to see a dog standing on its hind legs. I don't know if it ran for a few ticks and then stood up again at intervals in the field, but that's the way that they described it. Many times I asked them, "Are you sure it wasn't just a bear?" No, it was definitely a dog standing on hind legs, a big dog that was stalking them. Also, this is in Lane County, Oregon in the year 2000. There are few, if any, bears out there. It would be odd, but then again, I wasn't there. The kids got into the car and sped off, leaving the Pisca dog to his own business. I've never had a reason to doubt any of their stories. In fact, S doesn't like to talk about the incident at all because it's just apparently too creepy for her to recall.
This all started 6 months ago when my friends and I decided to go to a pool party in a nearby resort. And like always, we were drunk like hell, doing random stuff in the pool. After the pool party was over, I realized that my sunglasses were missing. It was a cheap pair of sunglasses that I got for free in a deal, so I shook it off and we went for lunch. While discussing random stuff at the lunch table, I saw the pool cleaners emptying the pool and changing the water. I called over one of the cleaners and asked him if they'd found any sunglasses. He replied, "No sir, but if we do, I'll send it to your room." I thanked him and gave him the room number. Finally, after having lunch, I went to my hotel room and slept. After about an hour, my doorbell rang. I got up, still hungover from excess alcohol. I saw a room boy with a pair of swanky Ray-Ban sunglasses in his hands. He said, "Sir, these are the sunglasses we found next to the pool. Are these yours?" I saw those beautiful sunglasses and out of greed I said, "Yeah, these are mine, thanks a lot," and tipped $10 to the attendant. Not bad, I thought. $10 for a pair of sunglasses worth $100. The next day, while leaving for the office, I started looking for my new glasses and took them with me. Once I reached the office, I took my glasses off and started working. During the lunch break, I went down to get something to eat and have a smoke. I wore them again and started showing them off to my colleagues. Everything was going fine for about a week, and then I noticed a small boil near my eye. I ignored it and kept working. The next day, it was even bigger. I decided to wear my glasses again to work, so I grabbed them just as I was leaving. For the next 2 days, I wore my glasses and used an eye drop medicine suggested by my colleague, but it wasn't doing any good. Finally, I decided to see a doctor. The next day, I went to an ophthalmologist and showed him my eyes. After doing the basic checkup, he prescribed me some painkillers and an eye drop, and told me to rest and not go out in the sun for 3 days. That seemed like jackpot to me. I called up my boss and asked to work from home for the next 4 days and started working on my laptop. But the light from the laptop was also hurting my eyes, so I got my glasses and wore them while working. After a few hours of work, I decided to take a nap. You know how work from home works. When I got up, it was night, and I was at a nearby metro station without my shirt, glasses still on. It was dark and I removed them just to see where I was. I checked my surroundings and saw some bruises on my hand. Strange. No money in my pocket. I just saw a cab nearby and asked him to take me home. Luckily, my home keys were with me and I got home and saw the clock. It was 11 p.m. I dozed off while working at 7 p.m. I saw 23 missed calls from my boss and my friends. Anyway, I was too tired, so I decided to go to bed. The next morning after getting up, I went for a shower and saw some bruises on my legs as well. I then called up my boss and told him that I slept in. Maybe I was under the influence of too many painkillers. Now, I started working again, and when it was done, the clock was already showing 5 p.m. I felt hungry, so decided to make some food. Now, it was nighttime already, so I had my dinner, took my medicine and went to sleep. The next day, the eye sore was better, and while I was taking my shower, I heard a huge cry from the neighboring apartment. I came out of the shower and ran towards my main door. Almost 20 people were standing in our corridor, and my neighbor was howling and crying. When I went ahead, I saw the dead body of their pet dog, which was lying on the floor, and its head was cut off and kept in a gift wrap, like how those e-commerce gifts come when you order them at home. I almost puked when I saw that head. Someone had killed that dog and had cut his head off and wrapped it in a gift box. I don't feel comfortable seeing blood, so I went back inside immediately. As I entered my house, my eyes started hurting so bad. I immediately called a cab and went to see my doctor. This was the last time that I left my home. I have not stepped out of my home for the past 5 months. I've not seen my friends, family, or for that matter, any human being apart from the delivery boys who come to deliver food at my home. I was fired from my job 2 months ago. They can't allow work from home for more than 2 months. That's a company policy. All because I found out that a construction worker was killed the night I was at the metro station by a shirtless stranger. They found the CCTV footage and are hunting for that man, and I have ample amount of reasons to believe that it was me. I also later found out that the pet dog next door was killed not by some psycho, but by me, and packed in a box of a helmet which I had ordered last year from an e-commerce site. My eyes are still swollen, and I can't remove the free sunglasses which I got from that party. Why am I telling you this all now? While doing my annual house cleaning today, I found my doctor's stethoscope in my cupboard. With his head.
Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and maybe even hear them in the next video, like today. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links down below in the description. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.